To the world, he was Hoss Cartwright, the gentle giant of the Ponderosa. But for Dirk Blocker, he was just a father lost too soon. For 52 years, Dirk stayed silent about the one show he physically could not bring himself to watch. Today, we finally revealed the heartbreaking reason why.
You see, grief is a very strange, shape-shifting thing. But when your father is one of the most famous faces on the planet, grief doesn't just knock on your front door. It breaks into your living room through a television screen, and it refuses to leave. To understand the sheer gravity of this 52-year silence, you have to understand the monolithic cultural footprint of Dan Blocker in the 1960s. Before there were cinematic universes, before streaming algorithms dictated our viewing habits, there was Bonanza. Premiering in 1959, it was an unstoppable television juggernaut, eventually becoming the #1 show in America. And at the absolute center of that phenomenon was a man who defied every single Hollywood stereotype.
Dan Blocker was not a manufactured studio creation. Born in DeKalb, Texas, he entered the world weighing a staggering 14 pounds, destined to be larger than life. He grew to 6 feet 4 inches and nearly 300 pounds, but his physical mass was completely eclipsed by the depth of his intellect. Dan was a Korean War veteran, an infantry sergeant who earned a Purple Heart in combat. He was a former high school English teacher with a master's degree in the dramatic arts. He even turned down professional offers to play football and box just so he could pursue acting. When he stepped into the boots of Hoss Cartwright, the lovable, deeply empathetic middle son of the Ponderosa, the American public did not just watch him, they adopted him. They felt a profound parasocial ownership over his soul. But what the millions of adoring fans never saw was the young boy standing in the shadow of that blinding spotlight.
For young Dirk Blocker, trips to the grocery store or the local diner with his father were not normal family outings. They were chaotic mob scenes. The public demand for Dan Blocker was so intense that Dirk learned at a very early age that fame was not a gift, it was a thief. It stole his father's privacy, and it stripped away their quiet moments. Yet, despite the claustrophobia of celebrity, Dan was Dirk's closest ally, his protector, and his hero. And then, in the spring of 1972, the unthinkable happened.
The sequence of events that brought the Ponderosa to a grinding halt is a masterclass in how fragile human life truly is. In May of 1972, Dan Blocker checked into Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood, California, for what was supposed to be a completely routine gallbladder removal. The procedure was standard, the surgery went fine, but the morning after he was released, Dan complained of dizziness and a terrifying sharp pain. A blood clot had developed post-surgery and traveled directly to his lungs, triggering a massive pulmonary embolism. Within hours, the gentle giant of television was dead at the agonizingly young age of 43. Dirk Blocker was only 14 years old. The shockwave that ripped through the entertainment industry was unprecedented. Lorne Greene, who played the Cartwright patriarch, famously told his wife that he didn't see how the show could possibly go on, stating definitively that it was finished. Michael Landon was so utterly devastated that he wept openly on set, and years later confessed that whenever he needed to cry for a dramatic scene, he simply thought of Dan Blocker's passing. The producers of Bonanza were suddenly faced with an impossible, morbid dilemma. At the time, television shows simply did not address the death of an actor. Characters would be abruptly written out, sent away to college, or recast with zero explanation. But Dan Blocker was too monumental to erase. In a groundbreaking moment of television history, the writers made the decision to kill off Hoss Cartwright in the storyline. It was the very first time a major television show explicitly addressed the real-world death of a cast member. The grief you see in those final season episodes is not acting. It is raw, unadulterated devastation captured on 35mm film. But while the entire world mourned Hoss Cartwright, 14-year-old Dirk Blocker was suffocating under a completely different kind of trauma. This is where the psychology of nostalgia grief takes a dark and deeply counterintuitive turn. You would naturally assume that having hundreds of hours of high-definition, professionally lit footage of your late father would be an incredible blessing, a living home movie to comfort you on the darkest nights. But for Dirk, Bonanza was a psychological bear trap. Watching the show wasn't a comforting embrace, it was an ambush. Seeing his father ride a horse, laugh, and interact with a fictional family triggered an intense, irreconcilable cognitive dissonance. That wasn't just his dad on screen. That was the public commodity that had commanded his father's attention, the icon that the world felt entitled to mourn. Dirk engaged in a psychological survival tactic that experts call avoidant coping. He later admitted that he did a remarkably good job of completely denying the impact of his father's death. The reality of the loss was simply too vast to process, so he locked it away in a vault. And part of locking it away meant absolute avoidance of the show that made his father a legend. For decades, Dirk stayed completely silent about Bonanza. He physically could not bring himself to watch the reruns that played endlessly in syndication on nearly every television network on Earth. Imagine the sheer mental endurance required to navigate life when your deepest, most unresolved trauma is broadcast directly into millions of living rooms every single afternoon. To survive the oppressive legacy of his father's fame, Dirk had to meticulously engineer his own path in Hollywood. The trauma of being mobbed by fans as a child completely stripped him of any desire to be a leading man. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted the shadows. He wanted the safety of the ensemble. Starting with an appearance on Marcus Welby, M.D., and later securing a regular role on Baa Black Sheep, Dirk purposefully carved out a niche as a character actor. Being a supporting player was an act of rebellion against the fame that consumed his father. He became the ultimate utility player in Hollywood, popping up in everything from Little House on the Prairie to The X-Files. He was hiding in plain sight, successfully working in the very industry that defined his father, without ever having to carry the crushing weight of a franchise on his own shoulders. This lifelong strategy of supporting cast camouflage is exactly what makes his casting on the modern comedy masterpiece Brooklyn Nine-Nine so profoundly poetic. For 8 seasons, a whole new generation of television viewers fell in love with Dirk Blocker as Detective Michael Hitchcock, the hilariously incompetent, endlessly unbothered veteran cop. It was a masterclass in situational comedy and ensemble mechanics. Dirk was finally playing a character who provided immense comedic relief, utilizing a brilliant physical comedy that mirrored his father's natural timing, yet he was doing it entirely on his own terms. Hitchcock wasn't the star, he was the secret weapon. By leaning into this role, Dirk bridged a multi-generational gap, quietly carrying the Blocker television dynasty into the 21st century. Fans of modern sitcoms who Googled the beloved Detective Hitchcock were suddenly met with the startling realization that they were looking at the son of television royalty. But as Dirk grew older, outliving his father by decades, the vault he had built around his grief slowly began to crack. Passing the age of 43, the exact age his father was when the universe abruptly stopped, forces a deeply unsettling psychological reckoning on a child. It is the moment you become older than your parent ever got to be. This milestone often triggers an intense reevaluation of suppressed grief. Dirk began to realize that his 52-year silence wasn't just protecting him from the pain of loss, it was keeping him separated from the complexity of the man who raised him. He started to speak openly about Dan, not as the mythological Hoss Cartwright, but as a deeply generous, fiercely liberal man who secretly founded a home for girls in Los Angeles and demanded absolutely zero public credit for his philanthropy. This journey from absolute denial to quiet acceptance is a fascinating case study in the intersection of media preservation and human grieving patterns. When a normal person loses a loved one, the memories slowly fade, softening the sharp edges of the trauma. But when you are the child of a heavily syndicated television star, the media preservation actively works against your psychological healing. The deceased is kept artificially alive, perpetually frozen in their prime. Look at other children of immense Hollywood tragedy who often spiral into public self-destruction because the disparity between their private agony and the public's entertainment is too wide to cross. Dirk Blocker survived this uniquely modern psychological hazard by actively redefining his relationship with fame, choosing quiet artistry over chaotic celebrity, and eventually channeling his internal world into writing a book titled Master and the Little Monk. He didn't just survive the legacy of Hoss Cartwright. He honored it by forging a career that proved you do not need to be the center of the universe to make a massive impact on the audience. Dirk's decades-long refusal to watch Bonanza wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of profound self-preservation by a boy who just missed his dad. And while Dirk Blocker spent a lifetime hiding a deep, heartbreaking truth behind a brilliant comedic performance, he is far from the only television icon to do so. In fact, another legendary sitcom star spent their entire career masking a completely different, chilling reality while making the whole world laugh. To uncover the dark, hidden truth behind that story, click the video on your screen right now, and I will see you there.